Coming up on Colonial Crossfire. Cruz surprises in Iowa. Sanders runs neck and neck with Clinton. And the Zika virus is spreading. Joining us on the left, Atticus Franken. On the right, Devin Patel. And I'm your moderator, Andrew Desiderio. This is Colonial Crossfire. Cruz, Trump, Rubio, Clinton, and Sanders. 2016 is on. Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. The Iowa caucuses have come and gone. For months, the Hawkeye state was the focal point of the 2016 campaign. But now, after Ted Cruz pulled off an upset over Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton ever so slightly defeated Bernie Sanders, the race shifts to New Hampshire, South Carolina, and beyond. So, who's in it for the long run? Is the GOP race now down to a three-person contest? And who's the true progressive in this race? Here to analyze that and more, our student panel. On the left, Atticus Franken, a senior from Normal, Illinois, majoring in mathematics and economics. Atticus is the president of the GW Math and Stat Association. On the right, Devin Patel, a senior from San Francisco majoring in political science and philosophy. Devin is the chairman of the GW Executive Council of the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
In the run-up to the Iowa caucuses, 13 polls showed Donald Trump in first place, some with double-digit margins. But on caucus night, Ted Cruz defeated Trump by more than 6,000 votes, awarding the Texas senator 8 delegates to Trump's 7. Florida Senator Marco Rubio showed that he's on the rise, placing in a strong third behind Trump. The first votes of the 2016 campaign ended up serving as a winnowing process for this historically large GOP field. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee dropped out of the race on caucus night. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul and former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum also suspended their bids just days later. 8 major candidates now remain, but the Iowa results suggest it might truly be a three-man race between Cruz, Rubio, and Trump. The Donald is usually known for his bombastic, brash tenor, but after losing to Cruz on caucus night, Trump was slightly out of character.
I'm just honored. I'm really honored. And I want to congratulate Ted, and I want to congratulate all of the incredible candidates.
But just hours later, Trump said Cruz committed a fraud and called for a complete do-over of the caucuses. Now, this sentiment stems from controversial mailers that the Cruz campaign sent to voters across Iowa, as well as a rumor circulated by Cruz staffers on caucus night claiming Ben Carson was dropping out of the race. Devin, first off, what did you make of Trump's oddly gracious speech?
It was just that. It was odd. I was honestly very surprised at how gracious and to the point he was about conceding defeat to Ted Cruz. But then once he came out the next day saying he wanted to audit those results, it was the same old Trump throwing a temper tantrum.
So pivoting to the actual results of the caucuses themselves, Ted Cruz, how do you think he did it? Was it something he did, he said? Maybe did Trump's decision to skip the final debate before Iowa have an effect maybe on voters' minds?
I think ultimately Trump skipping the debate did have some sort of effect. How measurable, I can't tell you. I think that Cruz's immeasurable ground game in Iowa was just amazing. And
Atticus, do you think maybe the polls were wrong, as some have cited? Because Trump was ahead, sometimes by double digits, in those 13 polls beforehand.
I think there's no question the polls were wrong. I think right now we're seeing a strong, a much-needed strong correction in the methodology coming out of the Iowa caucuses. A lot of polls have been wrong. We saw in Kentucky how off those polls were. We saw in Iowa how off those polls were. They predicted a decisive Clinton win and a decisive Trump win, neither of which happened.
So if Trump ends up winning New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, and beyond, some have said that he doesn't have enough of an organization to go the long run to win the nomination. But if these polls are wrong, as you say, then he wouldn't have a chance at the nomination, right?
Not necessarily. It could. The polls are a separate issue from the organization. I think it is true. Trump lacks the organization needed. There's a reason why campaigns put together these organizations to try to win. There have been other candidates that have tried to do what he is doing with just, being very loud in the press and getting a lot of attention, and it hasn't worked so far historically.
Devin, who do you think is the next that should bow out of the race if they don't perform well enough in New Hampshire?
Carly Fiorina.
She was excluded, of course, from the ABC News presidential debate. Do you think she should drop out or stay in the race maybe?
Well, depending on if she can get on that debate stage, I know a lot of people are calling for her to get on, and depending on how she fares in New Hampshire, who knows, the polls, like Atticus said, are just everywhere, so she could do well, and she could stay in for South Carolina.
Right. Do you agree that this is a three-person race, Trump, Cruz, and Rubio?
No, I do not. I believe it's anyone's game still in New Hampshire. Like the saying goes, Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents. I don't remember a Mike Huckabee nominee. I don't remember Rick Santorum nominee. New Hampshire has a much better chance of picking the presidential nominee than Iowa does.
But don't you buy the idea that maybe these three candidates have more momentum and more media attention coming out of Iowa that could propel them to the nomination?
Undoubtedly, but at the same time, New Hampshire voters really value that ground game, really value that one-on-one interaction that candidates have so invested in.
Atticus, do you see that some establishment folks will start maybe backing Rubio in order to maybe stop Cruz and Trump?
Yeah, I think that's clear, and I think you could see that by the push to get Rick Santorum to endorse Rubio, albeit if I were his strategist, I would say it's premature, considering he is still not sure why he's endorsing Senator Rubio. He just knows that that's the right way to go if he wants to please the party.
Right, and of course you're referring to that TV appearance he did where he couldn't name any of Marco Rubio's Senate accomplishments.
Right.
Devin, do you think Rubio has the best chance to defeat Hillary Clinton, like many have said? He's young, he's Hispanic, he can maybe turn the tide towards the GOP this election?
The demographics are with him, but that's all he's got. He doesn't have any accomplishments to list, and Rick Santorum's interview only capstones that. Marco Rubio has been in the Senate for less than one term and has little to nothing to show for it. In a general election with Hillary Clinton, who, general opinion aside, she is an accomplished person with a long resume, and I don't think Marco Rubio can stand up to that.
We saw Rand Paul drop out of the race a couple days after Iowa. He was banking on, placing at least in the top 5 in the early states and then having enough of a good organization in the Midwest and the South to win the nomination. That was his plan as of last year. Hasn't really worked so far for him. Do you think this is maybe indicative of, people saying the liberty movement in the Republican Party maybe isn't as significant as we may have thought?
I don't think so. I think that Rand Paul caught on to something, and the constitutional movement, this liberty movement, was big and has been big in the Republican Party. And I just think that after a series of events, including Paris, San Bernardino, the shift of the political campaigns turned rapidly to national security, and so Rand Paul really lost out on that.
Right, and Atticus, that was my next question. These terrorist attacks we've been seeing, the rise of ISIS in the Middle East, has that maybe made Rand Paul's non-interventionist views unattractive to Republican primary voters?
I think they always have been. I think you look at the way Republicans have governed over the last couple of decades and their rhetoric, and he was an outlier from the beginning. I think the liberty movement in the Republican Party has been much overstated. I don't think nationally that it's a very small group, but I think within the Republican Party it actually is.
Do you think he maybe should have stayed in through New Hampshire and see how he could have done there, or you just don't think he had a chance?
I think Iowa was it for him.
At the nomination. And all right, I want to get a prediction from you. Who wins the nomination, and who do they pick as their vice president?
Nomination, I'm hopeful. Maybe John Kasich wins.
Okay.
Vice president, either Rubio or Nikki Haley.
Okay, interesting. So you're banking on John Kasich doing well in New Hampshire?
Yes.
Okay. Atticus, what do you think?
I think it'll be either Ted Cruz or Donald Trump. I think Marco Rubio will fizzle or at least not get the momentum he needs in order to stay put.
Interesting. So you don't think the establishment folks enough of them will get behind Rubio to knock off Cruz and Trump?
I don't see any evidence of it at this point.
All right. And we'll be back with more panel debate in just a moment, but first we'll send it over to Andy Weber of Unstoppable for a GWTV Sports Break. Andy?
Thanks, Andrew. Coming up on the next episode of Unstoppable, we'll update our viewers on all varsity winter sports, including basketball, swimming and diving, track, squash, and gymnastics. Nationally ranked squash gymnastics both look to make program history, while track continues to succeed in the second year of official competition. Mike Falco will also give an in-depth basketball report for both the men's and women's teams. We'll provide analysis on their season so far, and and what steps they need to take to do well in the Atlantic 10 tournament. And finally, we'll sit down with Athletic Director Patrick Nero, talk about the state of GW athletics, and what the department expects to accomplish in the coming years. All that and more on the next episode of Unstoppable. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andy, and be sure to catch Unstoppable coming soon right here on GWTV. Coming up after the break, we'll shift our conversation to the Democrats. It's now a two-person race, and the gloves are coming off. Stay with us.
Wonderful academic institution with a fine athletic tradition.
Patricio Garino throws it down with two hands.
Wonderful city. It's a great place to go to school.
Keaton Savage open down the right side. Will go and dunk it with his right hand.
Not just a family, it's a whole community.
Armwood dunks it with 1.9 seconds left. Armwood, a thunder slam. 81-80 George Washington. A huge victory for the Colonials.
So George's been doing a pretty good job since he started here, huh?
Yeah, but I don't think he understands Casual Friday yet.
Hey, George.
What's up, George?
Yeah, real presidential.
Welcome back. Republicans aren't the only ones attacking each other. Hillary Clinton narrowly edged Bernie Sanders in the Iowa caucuses by just 0.3%. After Martin O'Malley dropped out on caucus night, it's now officially a two-horse race. Sanders reignited tensions with Clinton this week when he said the former Secretary of State is a progressive, quote, on some days. Clinton was not happy with that characterization, firing back on Twitter by listing her progressive credentials. This caused Sanders to unleash a tweet storm of his own, accusing Clinton of being a moderate while using her own words against her. Clinton had her chance to respond to Sanders on the debate stage the very next day.
You know, we have differences, and honestly, I think we should be talking about what we want to do for the country. But if we're going to get into labels, I don't think it was particularly progressive to vote against the Brady bill 5 times. I don't think it was progressive to vote to give gun makers and sellers immunity. I don't think it was progressive to vote against Ted Kennedy's immigration reform. So we can go back and forth like this, but the fact is, most people watching tonight want to know what we've done and what we will do.
So Atticus, who's the true progressive?
I think both of them are, and I really would shy away from trying to choose a broad label that can only be applied to certain members of the party. We don't want to fall into the trap the Republicans have of disenfranchising many groups because they're not conservative enough. I don't think that's what the Democratic Party should be doing right now.
Devin, do you think this is a struggle for, I guess, the broader soul of the Democratic Party, this battle?
I do. Hillary Clinton clearly represents the establishment, as Bernie Sanders has often said, and Bernie Sanders is gaining a large amount of followers. His traction is only growing, and you're seeing the Democratic Party splitting at the seams.
Atticus, are Sanders' attacks on Clinton about her Wall Street donations and her use of super PACs, are those fair game?
I would say so. I mean, any of this stuff is fair game, within reason, and relationships to Wall Street as the president is a valid question.
I mean, using her own words, she did last year call herself a moderate. She said, yes, I plead guilty to that. And Bernie Sanders said, you know, I don't know any progressives who take money from Wall Street and use super PACs. Doesn't he have a point?
I think he has a point beyond the label of progressive. I mean, he is drawing a contrast between himself being independent from Wall Street, actually outraising Hillary Clinton in the month of January, about 20 million to 15 million, despite the absence of a super PAC and all of those things. But I think that's a separate question from whether or not Hillary is progressive or not. I think that's mostly a label. That doesn't inform the voters at all as to what they are going to do and what they want to do.
If somebody had said a year ago that a 74-year-old Democratic socialist from Vermont would be giving Hillary Clinton a run for her money, you know, this far into the the campaign, a lot of people would have said you're crazy. So, Devin, what do you think this virtual tie in Iowa between these two candidates means for the Democratic race?
Like I said before, I really do think that the Democratic Party is seeing a really big dichotomous seam being ripped between them. And honestly, if they can't come together, if Bernie and Hillary can't reconcile their differences, I don't see a way forward for the Democratic Party.
Atticus, what's your response?
I think it's indicative of a long-term trend. I mean, there's a lot of frustration that the economic trends have not changed over the last 30 years or 35 since the Reagan administration, and there's a lot of frustration. The economy is struggling, and a lot of the conservative or conservative light approaches have failed miserably. So there, I mean, I can see the frustration now. Whether or not there would be a socialist there, yes, I think that surprises many people, as the label doesn't appear to be toxic anymore to a great majority, really, of the party.
Real quick, do you think Bernie Sanders should challenge the results of the Iowa caucuses, given that they were so close and some precincts came down to a coin flip?
I don't think it would be smart for the Sanders campaign to challenge, but I would ask the Iowa Democratic Party to grow up and audit the results to make sure that they have a fair race. This is the United States. Everybody should know. They should release vote totals again, and any scrutiny of election results should be welcomed by all parties.
Devin?
I completely agree. The Democratic primary, or the Democratic caucus in Iowa, is shrouded in all this mystery and nonsense, quite frankly, and they really do need to release these vote totals.
The State Department announced last week that they couldn't release about 20 of Hillary Clinton's emails because they contained top secret information, but they also stressed that they were designated as such after the fact. Atticus, do you see this issue being a problem for her in the long run?
Not if it's retroactive classification, but also I think the email issue is, frankly, a distraction. We know that Secretary Rice, we know that Secretary Powell used private email servers. It's amazing to me how a lot of these issues become scandals once a Democrat ends up in, being the one who gets caught. I mean, we all know this. It was cited by the government sources, and I don't understand why Hillary Clinton is the one solely that has to share the burden of it.
Devin, I imagine you disagree.
Yes, I do. I think it'll be very difficult for Democrats to blame Republicans for a witch hunt once the FBI begins to indict Hillary Clinton. FBI is most certainly not a vehicle of the Republican Party.
Do you think the FBI is going to indict?
I do.
What if people around her get indicted instead of her? Do you think that still has an effect on the campaign? Can Republicans kind of push this narrative that she's untrustworthy because of that? That's what some have said, and potentially see Mike Bloomberg come into the race as a third party.
I believe it does. I mean, Hillary Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State, whether those around her get indicted and she doesn't, that allots to a problem. Either she was ignorant of what her subordinates were doing, or she's just a liar. So,
Atticus, Sanders has been unwilling to go on the offensive against Clinton on the email issue. Do you think that if he actually wants to be president, he has to start maybe ramping up his attacks on her, maybe painting her as untrustworthy, as some Republicans have done?
I hope not. I hope our democracy is more mature than that. But going back to that, my claim is not that we're trying to blame the Republicans on this. It's just, why is it that we do not hear about the Republicans also being under the same system? It should not be. It's not whether we're blaming one side. It's whether we're actually dealing with the problem or just trying to politicize it. If you see only one side of the equation being attacked, then you know it's politicized. You know it's not actually going after the issue at the heart of what we're talking about. Back to the emails, but I think, I don't think Bernie Sanders should really go after her on that. I think part of the energy around him is that he's running a positive campaign. He has stuck to the issues, whether or not people agree with them, and I mean, if he sticks to that, I think his momentum will continue to stay put for the time being.
What about what Devin said about the fact that the FBI is not a political organization, so they're not going to time their indictment with certain primaries or try to influence the outcome of the election? They're not a political organization, right?
Right, but then why are we not hearing about the total reports coming out of there about how other administrations have used private email servers? We have governorships that have used it, such as Jeb Bush while he was governor of Florida. This isn't a new issue. I don't know why Hillary Clinton has to be the one who fights it.
I suspect it's because her name is Hillary Clinton. But Devin, I'll give you the last word on that.
I'm just eagerly awaiting that FBI document.
All right, and finally, guys, predictions. I'll start with you, Atticus. Who gets the nomination? Who does he or she pick as their vice president?
I think Hillary is still the slight favorite, but not by much at this point. And as far as vice president, of course, we have Secretary Castro, who's up there. I think Jay Nixon from Missouri will be calling. I don't think his calls will be taken. Otherwise, I think the Democrats really want to have a surprise on there as far as their VP pick. I don't think it's going to be easy to tell.
Interesting. Do you think that it's a problem that both Clinton and Sanders are up there in age, like they would need to pick someone really young as their VP?
No, how old is Hillary Clinton? 68?
And then Sanders is about 74.
Right.
So their average age is 71.
Well, I don't think it'll be an issue as far as electability. I mean, Ronald Reagan started at 69, and
Right.
John McCain was definitely older than Hillary. So I hope Republicans don't attack us for age.
Devin, what's your prediction?
I agree with Atticus that Hillary Clinton will probably walk away with this, but narrowly. As far as vice presidential candidates go, the field is open. Julian Castro is a good pick for her. Cory Booker could be an option if she wants to appeal to the more progressive lane that Bernie Sanders took up, maybe Elizabeth Warren. So
Yeah, Warren hasn't endorsed yet, and there are some female Democratic senators that are urging her to endorse Hillary Clinton. Real quick, do you think she'll pick Bernie?
I do.
You do?
If she does pick.
Atticus?
I think so as well.
Okay, interesting. After this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us.
Nearly 16 million people visit Washington, D.C. every year. Some come to witness, some to be heard. We come to make an impact, to learn from leaders, and to lead others. To create and create change. We are the George Washington University. We come to make history.
The George Washington University, at the intersection of policy, practice, and research, connecting all that Washington has to offer with an intellectual environment that drives progress, transforming vision into action, offering learning experiences that are rigorous, real-time, and real-world. In a city shaping the future, George Washington is a place where faculty and students don't just study the world, they work to change it.
Welcome back. Our panel joins us again for Rapid Fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. President Obama visited a mosque for the first time during his presidency. Obama condemned what he called inexcusable political rhetoric against Muslim Americans. Devin, was that a shot at Donald Trump?
Clearly it was a shot at Donald Trump, but I mean, it took President Obama 7 years into his term to come and visit a mosque. If this wasn't a political moment, I don't know what is.
Atticus?
I think he's just trying to be inclusive of everybody and remind everybody in the United States during this time of heated rhetoric that if you are an American, you are an American. Muslims are Americans. We all are. I mean, divisiveness is not healthy.
Do you think it was political because of the timing of the visit, as Devin is suggesting?
I'm not certain that it was. I mean, even if it was political, I don't think it's the kind of politics that has any negative effects on our democracy.
All right, and Facebook says it will ban private gun sales on the social media platform. The move is meant to prevent illegal firearm sales online, transactions that are often completed without a background check. Atticus, does this undermine free enterprise, as some have suggested?
No, because Facebook is a private company. They can do and sell, and they can whatever they want. So no, this is actually the definition of free enterprise. They are a private entity deciding what they do and do not want to sell. So if Facebook does not want to sell guns, then that's fine. Again, as a private entity, they are not. It's not like they have the same scrutiny as the public sector is making decisions as to whether or not you want to sell guns. So,
Devin?
I completely agree. I think that, like Atticus said, this is the definition of free enterprise, but it's also important to note that they're only banning individual-to-individual sales. Gun companies, gun stores can still operate on Facebook.
So you agree with the move, then?
Yeah.
Okay. And finally, a United Nations committee declared abortion to be a human right. The decision was made after a Peruvian woman was denied a medically indicated abortion. Devin, was this the right decision?
I think this is the UN once again trying to grab headlines. They're clearly ignoring one of their first doctrines of the right to life. So,
Atticus, is abortion a human right?
in certain cases, yes. I mean, in this case, it was a medical issue, and I think the UN responding to medical need for abortion in these specific cases is appropriate. Whether or not it was something that they were trying to make binding, which I don't think it was, then no, I mean, I don't see any issue with it.
And with that, we end our debate here on Colonial Crossfire. Thank you so much to Atticus Franken and Devin Patel for joining us. The World Health Organization has declared a global public health emergency over the spread of the so-called Zika virus. The virus originated in Brazil and has already spread to at least 29 countries. Pregnant women infected with the virus have reported severe birth defects in their newborn babies. The WHO predicts that 3 to 4 million people in the Americas alone will be infected over the next year. Zika is transmitted primarily through a specific type of mosquito, but the first case confirmed in the continental United States was transmitted sexually. Now, despite the grim outlook, the Centers for Disease Control says a vaccine will take at least 3 years to be fully developed and is warning pregnant women against traveling to affected areas. Earlier, I spoke with GW Milken Institute School of Public Health professor Ron Waldman about the virus and whether the world is prepared to combat it. Dr. Waldman, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So what type of symptoms would someone with Zika have?
So this is a pretty benign viral disease in general. First of all, about 80%, 4/5 of the people who contract the virus have no symptoms at all. It goes completely unnoticed. About 1 in 5 people will have symptoms that consist of slight fever, fleeting temporary rash all over their body, muscle soreness, fatigue, the usual things you get with cold-like syndrome with a rash. It's not a very serious disease at all.
So do you think the sort of international hysteria we've seen over this virus is a little overblown then?
I think that the attention that the press has put on it is not necessarily overblown because of the reports that have been coming out of Brazil over the past few months of an association between the infection itself, symptomatic or not, and cases of a relatively rare congenital malformation called microcephaly, or a small head, inadequate development of the brain and the bones of the head that causes for a misshapen cranium or skull in the fetus and subsequently in the newborn child, and possibly serious brain defects.
So why do you think the international community was not as prepared as we would have liked to see for this?
Oh, I wouldn't say it wasn't prepared. I think that although the disease has been around for a long time, and you may know it was discovered, and the name comes from the place where it was discovered in the Zika jungles of Uganda in the late 1940s, the disease has been around since then, but no one really paid a lot of attention to it until relatively recently. There was an outbreak then in 2013 and 14 in French Polynesia, following a few lesser outbreaks in Africa, and then this explosion apparently in South America, and particularly in Brazil, and particularly in northeastern Brazil. But I think that the system worked reasonably well, I think, in that when the more serious consequences of the disease were detected or thought to be detected, because we're not sure yet. So we're still working largely on suspicions, which is a good thing. When that was detected in northeastern Brazil, the health authorities of Pernambuco state reported it to the national authorities. The national authorities reported it to the Pan American Health Organization. The Pan American Health Organization reported it to WHO headquarters. They acted fairly quickly to convene a meeting under the international health regulations and declared it a public health emergency of international concern. So I think the system worked pretty well like that. Whether all of that was entirely necessary is something else.
But in terms of having a vaccine, weren't they, in essence, not prepared with a vaccine?
Not prepared with a vaccine. I don't think that it is the kind of disease to which we would necessarily want to shift resources that should be reserved for higher priority conditions when we don't know, with all of our scientific knowledge, we felt that this was a relatively minor concern. It's a virus that's in the same family of other diseases, such as dengue virus, for example, for which we have been working, a much more serious disease that results in more than 20,000 deaths a year. And we've been working very hard to develop a vaccine for that related virus, and it's also related to a very serious disease called yellow fever, for which we have a safe and effective vaccine.
Right.
So it's part of the process of scientific discovery, if you will.
There have been at least 3 reported cases of Zika here in Washington, D.C. Is there cause for concern for those of us who live here?
No. for two reasons. First of all, for maybe three reasons. First of all, none of those cases were contracted in the United States. They're all in travelers. So should travelers take precautions when they're going to countries that have reported larger numbers of cases of Zika virus? Yes, they should. And we can come back and we go through what those precautions might be. Secondly, it's the middle of the winter here now. I know because I just walked over here from my office. It's pretty cold outside. We don't have any mosquitoes. This is a mosquito-borne disease. For the most part, yes, we'll talk about sexual transmission and potentially other modes of transmission, but this is a mosquito-borne and mosquito-transmitted disease, and we have no mosquitoes in the middle of the winter here.
Right. And
secondly, there are two different species of mosquito that carry the disease. One is called Aedes aegypti. We don't have that here in the northeastern part of the United States. Most of the transmission of Zika is through Aedes aegypti, although there's a second species of Aedes albopictus, which we do have in relatively small numbers in this part of the country. So it means that we need to heighten our surveillance when mosquito season begins at the beginning of the spring and through the summer. And take some heightened precautions to avoid being bitten by mosquitoes that may, although I think it's a little bit of a long shot, be carrying Zika virus.
And that was my next question about warmer climates. Brazil obviously has a very warm climate, and some international health experts have said that Brazil could have Zika for years to come, and it could sort of become an endemic. Is there a risk of sort of an endemic occurring in the U.S., parts of the U.S. where there are warmer climates, like maybe down south?
Yes. As is the case with dengue, which is increasing in numbers. Florida and Texas, the two southernmost states for sure, are at risk. Other parts of the Gulf Coast as well. Wherever the mosquito vector exists, breeds and exists in its ecological zone, they could be harboring and transmitting the virus.
What effect do you think the virus will have on the Summer Olympics coming up this summer in Rio?
I think it could have an impact. It's going to depend on what individuals say and do, and it's going to depend on how the public health authorities handle the situation and in the level of faith and belief and credence that the population puts in the recommendations of the international and Brazilian public health authorities. But you bring up a really good point, because it doesn't necessarily have to be restricted to the Olympics. This is a disease that has killed exactly 0 people so far. Mm-hmm. The threat that people are perceiving is the threat of microcephaly and perhaps of a neurological disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is an ascending paralysis. First of all, let me say that although 26 countries have been affected by Zika virus, and we know it's circulating, microcephaly has only been reported from Brazil, and 80% of the cases in Brazil have been reported from a single state. I think it's difficult to say exactly how strong the association between Zika virus and microcephaly is right now. A lot more work needs to be done. That said, the CDC, the premier health agency of the United States, has issued a travel advisory to pregnant women, advising them not to travel to areas that are affected.
Especially the Olympics.
And especially the Olympics. But it will have an impact starting now in the Caribbean. This is tourist season.
Yeah.
Cruise lines will be affected. The economies of many island nations in the Caribbean will be affected. The economies of tourist destinations in Central and South America will be affected. So for this disease that has caused 0 deaths, the impact will go far beyond the health sector into tourism, into other areas of potential growth in developing countries, potential growth that will now be set back.
Right, so you see a big economic impact coming. And finally, given your vast experience dealing with these infectious diseases on sort of an international scale, are you optimistic about the prospects of a vaccine and eventually eradicating it?
I'm certainly confident that there eventually will be a vaccine, but it won't be tomorrow and it won't be this year. I think the most optimistic estimate that the National Institutes of Health has put forth so far is that it's conceivable on a very accelerated schedule to be able to see a vaccine sometime towards the end of 2017. The way to control this virus is going to be through mosquito abatement, policies, and they're not so easy. There are the examples of places that have been able to eliminate their mosquito populations are few and far between. This one's a little bit difficult to deal with because it breeds in very, very small bodies of water. It doesn't need rivers or streams. It can breed inside castaway spare tires, for example, or just puddles on the ground. It only bites during the daytime, so when people are circulating, so it's not enough to say people should sleep under mosquito nets at night. That's not going to help. So people are going to have to use insect repellent. People are going to have to wear long clothes to protect themselves from being bitten. I think it's going to be very difficult to get rid of altogether. I think we have a lot of work to do still to see exactly how important a threat it represents. I think that the declaration of a public health emergency of international concern from the World Health Organization was based, of course, on some political considerations. That organization's reputation was severely damaged by the way it handled Ebola.
Right.
It didn't want to take that risk again. So it made this declaration. Warranted or not, I think it's a good thing because it helps us get our surveillance systems together. Right now there are 3 different surveillance systems for reporting microcephaly in Brazil. Some people report through that way, some people report through a different channel. That makes it very difficult to get a handle on the accurate number of cases that are occurring. So with this declaration, the World Health Organization will take upon itself to coordinate efforts. It will get surveillance together. It will have meetings of a variety, a large number of partners in public health who will decide on a coordinated and appropriate control strategy that will include mosquito control, that will include research into a cure, there is none now, and research into vaccine development.
And of course, we are very optimistic for the vaccine. Dr. Waldman, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate
Thank you very
the time.
much. Thanks for having me.
My thanks to Dr. Waldman. When we come back, Casey Decker has our debate fact check.
I believe. I believe that. I believe that we. I believe that we will win.
It's been pretty busy around here with parcel and flex plans going on sale, so we need an extra pair of hands around the office.
Let's go G-Dub! Let's go G-Dub!
We had no idea you were bringing the Colonial Army.
Whoosh! G-Dub! G-Dub!
Hey George, I think you have an update for Firefox. Never mind.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitored our debate. Casey Decker is here to fill us in on what we missed. Casey?
Thanks, Andrew. Only one thing this week. During the discussion of Hillary Clinton's emails, our liberal debater Atticus compared her situation to those of Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. Both former secretaries used private email accounts that received information that was eventually marked as classified. However, we should note that unlike Clinton, Rice and Powell did not have private servers. The information in their accounts was stored on government servers. That's all we have for the fact check. Andrew?
Thanks, Casey. And now for Spilled Milk. Here's our tribute to the very best of late-night political comedy.
Today, my love has gone away. The bottle stands so long, the symbol of the dawn.
Because apparently what America needs is a president who will quit the moment things don't go his way, leaving the country in the care of his hand-picked vice president, above gold wearing a Miss Universe sash.
But Flint's water supply continues to be undrinkable due to toxic lead poisoning. In fact, there's so much lead in the water that poisoned Flint residents are now eligible to be used as number 2 pencils for the SAT.
He didn't tweet for an unprecedented 15 hours. Can you imagine a Trump so sad he didn't have the energy to tweet negative thoughts? I'm sure Melania was talking to him through the door. Do you want to tweet about how Jeb Bush is low energy? How about how Ted Cruz has no friends? Should you tweet mean things to Rosie O'Donnell? That always makes you smile.
Thank you, Bernie Sanders, for releasing a new campaign ad using the Simon & Garfunkel song, America. Not to be confused with the song Jeb Bush uses at his rallies, The Sound of Silence, on that side.
He only got 12 votes. That is less, and this is true. We looked it up.
than the number of people in Iowa named Jim Gilmore.
All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. For all the latest updates from our political team at any time, be sure to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Andrew Desiderio. Thanks so much for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.